In 1943, a man walked into a room full of the most powerful military leaders on earth and fired a revolver at a block of ice. The bullet ricocheted off the surface and buzzed around the legs of admirals and generals like an angry bee. Behind the thick wooden doors, someone shouted, "My God, the Americans are shooting the British!" But inside that room, nobody was alarmed. They were laughing because the ice had won. The man behind this demonstration had proposed something so outrageous that half the Admiralty thought he had lost his mind. He wanted to build an aircraft carrier out of frozen water, 600 meters long, 2 million tons of displacement, 22 times heavier than any warship ever constructed, a floating fortress that could not be sunk by any torpedo because any hole could simply be patched with a garden hose and freezing air. Winston Churchill read the proposal, stamped it most secret, and ordered, "Build it immediately." But the man who dreamed up this impossible weapon was not a decorated officer. He was not even a proper scientist. He was a tall, stooping figure in a battered hat and filthy clothes, with no tie, no socks, and a shoestring holding his trousers together. His colleagues called him one of the greatest geniuses of his time. The military establishment called him a dangerous lunatic, and the Secret Service suspected he was a Soviet spy. His name was Geoffrey Pyke, and before he ever imagined an unsinkable ship, he had already pulled off one of the most extraordinary escapes of the First World War. Geoffrey Nathaniel Joseph Pyke was born on the 9th of November, 1893, in Kensington, London, into a family that should have given him every advantage. His father, Lionel Edward Pyke, was a brilliant barrister who had taken silk at 38, ran for Parliament as a Liberal, and became leader of the Admiralty Bar. His grandfather was warden of London's Central Synagogue. His maternal great-grandfather was a French count. On paper, this was a boy destined for the establishment. But fate had other plans. When Geoffrey was just 5 years old, his father was taken by a respiratory illness at the age of only 44. It shattered the family. His mother, Mary Rachel Pyke, suffered a nervous breakdown. And when she recovered, she became something worse. Domineering, controlling, and by Geoffrey's own later account, she made life at home a living hell. She sent him to Wellington College, a militaristic boarding school built for the sons of army officers. He was an outsider from the moment he walked through the gates. The experience left deep marks on him, not scars of weakness, but scars of defiance. He came out of that school with a hatred of authority, a contempt for tradition, and a mind that refused to think inside anyone else's boundaries. He left Wellington and was educated privately before entering Pembroke College, Cambridge, to read law. He never finished the degree. War would see to that. But at Cambridge, something remarkable happened. His abilities made him conspicuous. He joined the Cambridge Heretics, a famous debating society whose recent speakers had included Rupert Brooke and G.K. Chesterton. He befriended Philip Sargent Florence, who would remain a lifelong ally, and he developed the quality that would define his entire life, an absolute, unshakable belief that he was the smartest person in any room he entered. It made people uncomfortable. It made the establishment nervous, and it made Geoffrey Pyke extraordinarily dangerous, because most of the time he was right. On the 1st of September 1914, just weeks after Britain declared war on Germany, a 20-year-old Cambridge dropout walked into the offices of the Daily Chronicle on Fleet Street. He had no journalism experience, no credentials, and no reputation, but he had something far more dangerous: total confidence in his own brilliance. He told the news editor that he was one of the greatest reporters in the world, and that he wanted to go to Berlin, not as an embedded correspondent, not with military escort. He wanted to go alone, undercover, behind enemy lines into the heart of the German Empire. The editor, perhaps amused, perhaps impressed, agreed on one condition: no salary, expenses only. Pyke accepted without hesitation. He obtained a forged American passport from a sailor, bought a German suit, and entered the country through Warnemünde, a quiet Baltic port that he had identified as Germany's back door. For 6 extraordinary days he moved freely through a nation at war. He eavesdropped on conversations in cafes and railway stations. He discovered that civilian life in Germany was nothing like the grim picture painted by the British press. He was gathering material for what would have been one of the great scoops of the war. Then it all collapsed. In early October, German authorities found him in his room, with a highly incriminating letter written in English sitting on his desk. His guards delivered the news with cold efficiency. They told him he would probably not see another sunrise. He was not executed. But what followed was arguably worse. Pyke endured approximately 13 weeks of solitary confinement in total darkness. He kept himself sane by piecing together Kipling's poem If and Lewis Carroll's Jabberwocky from memory, reciting them over and over in the blackness. He questioned his own sanity, wondering whether going mad was the only rational response to madness. On the subject of hunger, he later wrote, "Real hunger, not the missing your afternoon tea sort of affair, can make life one continual aching desire, and has been known to make men think very seriously about the rights of property." He was eventually transferred to Ruhleben internment camp, a converted racecourse 5 miles west of Berlin, where he nearly lost his life to double pneumonia. But instead of breaking, Pyke did what Pyke always did. He started thinking. He met a fellow Englishman named Edward Falk, who spoke fluent German, and the two began planning their escape with scientific precision. Pyke compiled statistical data on every previous escape attempt from the camp. Not just how people got out, but why they were caught afterward. Others had gotten over the fences. Nobody had gotten out of Germany. On the afternoon of the 9th of July, 1915, Pyke and Falk crept into a storage hut and hid beneath a pile of tennis nets. They had calculated that the glare of the setting sun would blind the patrolling guard at exactly the right moment. After dark, they climbed the perimeter fences, walked calmly to the nearest tram stop, and took a tram straight through the center of Berlin. They bought civilian clothes and camping equipment, then headed west toward the Dutch border. When they ran out of roads, they walked 80 miles through fields, forests, and barbed wire, discarding everything they carried except rope made from string. They were starving, exhausted, and running on nothing but willpower. Finally, near what they believed was the frontier, they stopped to rest. A soldier appeared out of the darkness and approached them. After weeks of running, this was the moment they had dreaded. But the soldier spoke, and the language was Dutch. Pyke and Falk looked at each other. They were already 50 yards inside the Netherlands. Pyke returned to London expecting to apologize for his failure as a correspondent. Instead, he discovered that his escape story, cabled from Amsterdam, had become one of the biggest scoops Fleet Street had seen during the entire war. He was the first Englishman to get into wartime Germany and back out alive. He published his account as a book, To Ruhleben and Back, and the New York Times called it a work of absorbing interest. Geoffrey Pyke was 21 years old, and he was just getting started. In March of 1918, Pyke married Margaret Amy Chubb, the daughter of a Hampshire doctor. Their son David would go on to become a distinguished physician. But Pyke had no interest in a quiet domestic life. His mind was already racing toward the next impossible challenge, and this time it was money. He threw himself into commodity speculation on the London Metal Exchange, trading tin and copper through a network of multiple stockbrokers so that no single one could see the full scale of his operation. The strategy was breathtakingly ambitious, and it worked. At his peak, one source claims he controlled roughly a quarter of the world's supply of tin. He moved in Cambridge financial circles alongside John Maynard Keynes himself. The penniless escape artist had become a serious player in global markets. And then he did something truly extraordinary with the profits. In October of 1924, he founded the Malting House Garden School in Cambridge, a converted malt house on the corner of Newnham Road and Malting Lane. This was not an ordinary school. It was a radical experiment. Children were treated not as students, but as little scientists and research workers. There were no punishments, no forced subjects, no formal instruction. Teachers observed rather than taught. The advertisement for a principal specified wanted a scientist of the first order. Ernest Rutherford, the father of nuclear physics, agreed to help select candidates. The post went to Susan Sutherland Isaacs, a brilliant psychologist. Jean Piaget visited in its early days. Educators came from around the world to see what Pyke had built. But Geoffrey Pyke could never leave well enough alone. While the school was thriving, he turned back to the markets, this time attempting to corner the global copper supply. It was a gamble of staggering proportions, and an American cartel crushed him. In 1927, Pyke lost everything. He declared bankruptcy. The school was forced to close. Susan Isaacs departed. Yet here was the pattern that would define his entire life. Everything Pyke built seemed to collapse around him, but everything that survived him changed the world. Isaacs published 2 landmark books based on her work at the Malting House: Intellectual Growth in Young Children and Social Development in Young Children. Those books reshaped early childhood education across the globe. The revolutionary school that Pyke could no longer afford to run had already planted seeds that would grow for decades after its doors were shut. Geoffrey Pyke was now broke, discredited, and alone. The 1930s stretched ahead of him like a wasteland, but across the English Channel, a darkness was rising in Europe, and the world was about to need exactly the kind of mind that polite society had thrown away. To understand what happened next, you need to picture the man. Geoffrey Pyke stood just over 6 feet tall, walked with a permanent stoop, and wore a battered Homburg hat over his balding head. He had thick glasses perched on what one observer described as an eagle-like beak, and a wild unkempt beard that looked like it had never been introduced to a pair of scissors. He rarely bathed. He almost never changed his clothes, and wore them until they were so rumpled and stained that it was hard to believe they had ever been washed or ironed. He used a shoestring as a tie. He disdained socks entirely, and his flies were notoriously stuck open. One colleague put it simply: he looked for all the world like a hobo. He worked from his bed in a Hampstead flat, surrounded by towers of paper, sardine tins, overflowing ashtrays, cups of cold lapsang souchong tea, half-empty bottles, and documents stamped "Most Secret." His room was described as a papery metropolis of maps, journals, statistical compendiums, and letters marked with the highest security classifications. He suffered from something close to hypergraphia, an uncontrollable compulsion to write, covering every scrap of paper within reach with notes, calculations, and ideas. King George VI reportedly entertained dinner guests by impersonating Pyke, stroking the royal chin with exaggerated gestures while the table roared with laughter. But the opinions of those who actually worked with him were violently divided. J.D. Bernal, one of the most respected scientists in Britain, called him one of the greatest geniuses of his time. Lancelot Law White, who helped develop the jet engine, compared his mind to Einstein's. One colleague said he was the sort of man who would have invented the wheel. Nobel-winning playwright Elias Canetti thought he looked like a figure from a Byzantine icon. Others were less charitable. He was called querulous, flamboyant, disorganized, standoffish, and haughty. Americans who encountered him found him arrogantly repulsive and offensive. Lord Zuckerman, the government's chief scientific advisor, offered what may have been the most honest assessment of all. Not a scientist, but a man of a vivid and uncontrollable imagination and a totally uninhibited tongue. This was the man who was about to walk into the headquarters of British Combined Operations and convince Lord Mountbatten to let him fight the war. Pyke's route into the war ran through Leopold Amery, a Conservative member of Parliament who sat in Churchill's war cabinet. Amery had been championing Pyke's plan for commando winter warfare operations in Nazi-occupied Norway. The War Office rejected it. The previous head of Combined Operations rejected it, but Amery refused to let it go. He wrote directly to Lord Louis Mountbatten, who had just been appointed Chief of Combined Operations in October 1941. Amery's argument was simple. Even if the plan itself was not feasible, Geoffrey Pyke was obviously the possessor of exactly the type of mind that would interest Mountbatten. Their first meeting in early February 1942 was a collision of two entirely different worlds. On one side of the desk sat Lord Mountbatten, immaculate aristocratic, a cousin of the king. On the other side stood a tall, painfully thin man whose beard badly needed trimming, whose distinctly dirty collar had no tie, and whose trousers failed to meet his shoes by at least 6 inches. The contrast was almost comical. Pyke opened his mouth and delivered a line that would have gotten any other man thrown out of the building. He said, "Lord Mountbatten, you need me on your staff because I am a man who thinks, but my services will not be purchased cheaply." He then demanded a salary that far exceeded what Mountbatten himself was being paid. Lord Louis tactfully pointed out this slight imbalance. Pyke was eventually hired as Director of Programs at Combined Operations Headquarters for £1,500 per year, a title deliberately vague enough to allow him freedom to poke into any operational matter that excited his attention. When MI5 and MI6 delivered urgent warnings about Pyke's suspected leftist sympathies and possible connections to Soviet intelligence, Mountbatten made a decision that would change the course of the war. He decided that Pyke's usefulness outweighed any potential complications. When military staff complained that Pyke was a disruptive nuisance, Mountbatten's response was characteristically blunt. Too damned bad. Pyke's first major proposal was Operation Plough, a plan to deploy small, fast snow vehicles carrying commando teams behind enemy lines in Norway, targeting heavy water plants and industrial facilities. He envisioned a radical screw-propelled machine based on spiral-flanged cylinders that could dig into deep snow. When Churchill read the one-page summary, he wrote a note in the margin that deliberately echoed his own famous Battle of Britain speech. "Never in the history of human conflict will so few immobilize so many." The vehicle was developed by George Klein at Canada's National Research Council and manufactured by Studebaker as the M29 Weasel, a tracked cargo carrier, light enough to be dropped by parachute, fast enough to reach 36 miles per hour. Nearly 15,000 were built. The commando unit raised for Operation Plough, the first special service force, earned the nickname the Devil's Brigade and became the direct ancestor of both American and Canadian Special Forces. They received the Congressional Gold Medal in 2013. But here was the supreme irony. The Norway mission was cancelled. The Weasel was never deployed in snow. Not once. Instead, it found extraordinary use in places nobody had imagined. Normandy's soft beaches, the frozen forests of the Battle of the Bulge, the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima, the mud of Okinawa. Its ground pressure was so low that it could not even trigger anti-tank mines. A vehicle designed entirely for Arctic warfare became one of the most versatile machines of the Second World War, and it never touched the environment it was built for. That was pure Pyke. His ideas never landed where he aimed them. They landed somewhere better, but the Weasel was only the warm-up. While the vehicle was being developed in Canada, Pyke's restless mind had already moved on to something far more ambitious, something so enormous, so outrageous, that even Mountbatten would need Churchill's personal authority to pursue it. To understand why an aircraft carrier made of ice was not madness, you first need to understand just how badly Britain was losing the war at sea. Winston Churchill himself wrote, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril." He called the Battle of the Atlantic the dominating factor all through the war, and said that never for one moment could they forget that everything happening elsewhere, on land, at sea, or in the air, depended ultimately on its outcome. The numbers were devastating. In 1942 alone, 1,664 Allied ships were sent to the bottom. Nearly 8 million tons of cargo, fuel, food, and weapons that never reached Britain. June of that year was the single worst month of the entire conflict. 124 ships lost in just 30 days. German submariners had a name for the period between January and August of 1942. They called it the Second Happy Time. 868 Allied ships were destroyed against only 42 U-boats lost. The mathematics of that exchange rate meant Britain was heading towards starvation. The reason was a 600-mile-wide stretch of open ocean in the middle of the North Atlantic, where no Allied aircraft could reach. They called it the Black Pit. Planes from Northern Ireland, Iceland, and Newfoundland simply ran out of fuel before they could cover it. Inside that gap, U-boats surfaced freely, recharged their batteries, coordinated wolf pack attacks by radio, and hunted at high speed, all without fear of detection from the air. The presence of even a single aircraft overhead was enough to force a submarine underwater and break up an attack. But in the Black Pit, there was nothing overhead. In October of 1942 alone, 56 ships were lost specifically in that zone. Britain desperately needed floating airfields in mid-ocean, but the fleet carriers were too scarce and too vulnerable. HMS Courageous had been torpedoed and lost in just 17 minutes on the 17th of September 1939, with 519 crew members going down with her. She was the first British warship lost to enemy action in the entire war. HMS Audacity, Britain's first escort carrier, proved the concept brilliantly during convoy HG-76, but she too was sunk, with 73 of her crew. Escort carriers would not be available in significant numbers until mid-1943. The stopgap measures were desperate and sometimes horrifying. CAM ships, catapult aircraft merchantmen, carried a single Hurricane fighter mounted on a rail. When a U-boat or a Condor bomber was spotted, the Hurricane was launched by rocket catapult, but the ship had no flight deck. The pilot could not land back on board. After his single sortie, he had to ditch his aircraft in the freezing North Atlantic and hope that a passing vessel would fish him out of the water before hypothermia took him. By late 1942, the situation was critical. Ships were going down at more than 100 per month. Only 18 very long-range aircraft covered the entire North Atlantic. Steel was rationed. Aluminium was scarce. Conventional carriers took years to build and consumed resources that Britain simply did not have. And this was the moment when Geoffrey Pyke, working from his bed in a Hampstead flat surrounded by sardine tins and classified documents, conceived the most audacious idea of the entire war. If you cannot build aircraft carriers from steel, then build them from something the ocean gives you for free. In October of 1942, while stationed in the United States, Pyke sent a 232-page memorandum to Mountbatten via diplomatic bag. His cover letter contained a rare moment of vulnerability. It may be gold, it may only glitter. I've been hammering at it too long and am blinded. The document laid out his proposal in exhaustive detail. He wanted to build a massive aircraft carrier from ice, not a small vessel, not a barge, a floating fortress that would dwarf every warship ever constructed. Mountbatten was captivated, but there was a fundamental problem with the idea. Ordinary ice is brittle. A torpedo would shatter it. A wave could crack it apart. If you wanted to build a ship from frozen water, you needed something stronger than frozen water. The answer came from an unlikely source, a discovery by two researchers named Herman Mark and Walter Hohenstein at the Polytechnic Institute of Brooklyn. They had found that mixing wood pulp into water before freezing it created a material dramatically stronger than pure ice. It was a simple concept with extraordinary results, and the man chosen to prove it was perhaps even more extraordinary than the material itself. Max Perutz was an Austrian-born crystallographer who had fled to England to escape the Nazis. In one of the war's crueler ironies, the British government had then interned him as an enemy alien and shipped him to a camp in Newfoundland. He was eventually recalled to serve the very country that had imprisoned him. Now Perutz was given a secret assignment: determine whether reinforced ice could actually work as a building material for ships. His laboratory was hidden beneath Smithfield Meat Market in London, concealed behind a screen of frozen animal carcasses hanging from hooks. In that underground cold room, surrounded by sides of beef and the smell of frozen flesh, Perutz conducted the experiments that would make history. He determined the optimal composition: approximately 14% sawdust or wood pulp mixed with 86% water and ice by weight. The team named the resulting material Pykrete, a combination of pike and concrete. The results stunned everyone who witnessed them. Pykrete had a tensile strength roughly 2.8 times greater than ordinary concrete. It could be machined like wood and cast like metal. It still floated. When immersed in water, the exposed wood pulp on its surface formed an insulating shell that dramatically slowed melting. And then came the test that turned skeptics into believers. A rifle bullet fired into a 2-foot block of ordinary ice shattered the block completely. The same bullet fired into a block of pykrete the same size made a tiny crater and stopped. The bullet was embedded in the surface without doing any significant damage. Perutz himself summarized the discovery with elegant simplicity. Blocks of ice containing as little as 4% wood pulp were weight for weight as strong as concrete. But Pykrete had a critical weakness that would eventually prove fatal to the entire project. At temperatures above -15 degrees Celsius, the material began to sag under its own weight through a process called plastic flow. Any ship built from Pykrete would need constant active refrigeration to maintain its structural integrity, every hour of every day in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. For now, though, that problem seemed solvable. What mattered in late 1942 was that a material existed which could stop a bullet, float on water, resist torpedoes, and be manufactured from two of the cheapest raw materials on Earth, sawdust and seawater. Pyke had found his miracle substance, and Mountbatten was about to take it straight to the most powerful man in Britain. The most famous story in the entire Habakkuk saga may or may not have actually happened. Mountbatten himself told it as an after-dinner anecdote for years, and like all great after-dinner stories, it improved with each retelling. According to his account, in late 1942 he was sent to Chequers, the Prime Minister's country residence, carrying a small parcel. When told that Churchill was in his bath, Mountbatten reportedly said, "Good, that is exactly where I want him to be." He went upstairs, called out through the bathroom door, and announced that he had a block of a remarkable new material that he wished to place in the Prime Minister's bath water. What happened next became legend. Mountbatten dropped the block of Pykrete between Churchill's bare legs in the steaming water. Both men stared at it. Minutes passed. The outer film of ice dissolved, but the exposed wood pulp insulated the remainder. The block simply sat there, refusing to melt in a bath hot enough to turn a normal ice cube to nothing in seconds. Churchill was mesmerized. Multiple historians have cautioned that this story may have been elaborated somewhat to entertain, and that the entire incident may have been imaginary. But what is not imaginary is what followed. On the 7th of December, 1942, Churchill issued a memorandum stamped "Most Secret" to the Chiefs of Staff. His words left no room for debate. I attach the greatest importance to the prompt examination of these ideas. The advantages of a floating island or islands, even if only used as refueling depots for aircraft, are so dazzling that they do not at the moment need to be discussed. He ordered one complete ship to be built immediately, with the highest priority. The project needed a name worthy of its ambition. It was taken from the book of Habakkuk, chapter 1, verse 5. Behold ye among the heathen, and regard and wonder marvelously, for I will work a work in your days, which ye will not believe, though it be told you. The name was consistently misspelled in official documents, likely Pyke's own error. But nobody cared. Project Habakkuk was now a direct order from the Prime Minister of Great Britain. 8 months later came the demonstration that nearly caused a diplomatic incident. The Quebec Conference, codenamed Quadrant, ran from the 14th to the 24th of August, 1943, at the Chateau Frontenac Hotel in Quebec City. Present were Churchill, Roosevelt, Canadian Prime Minister Mackenzie King, and the combined Chiefs of Staff, including Field Marshal Sir Alan Brooke, Admiral Ernest King, General George Marshall, and General Henry Arnold. This was the highest concentration of Allied military power in a single room during the entire war. On the 19th of August, during a closed-door session, Mountbatten secured permission to give a demonstration. Junior officers wheeled in 2 carts, one bearing a large block of ordinary ice, the other a block of Pykrete. After a brief speech, Mountbatten handed an axe to General Arnold, whom he designated as the strong man of the group. Arnold swung hard at the block of ordinary ice and knocked a clean chunk off. Then he swung at the Pykrete. The axe rebounded with such force that Arnold wrenched his arm and the block was barely chipped. Then Mountbatten drew his service revolver. He fired at the ice block. It shattered instantly, showering the assembled leaders with shards and fragments. He announced, "There, that is just what I told you. Now I shall fire at the block on the right to show you the difference." He aimed at the Pykrete and pulled the trigger. The bullet did not penetrate. It ricocheted off the surface and buzzed around the legs of the most senior military commanders in the Allied world like an angry bee. According to Alan Brooke's diary, the closest primary source we have, the bullet eventually lodged itself in the wall. The most commonly cited account says it grazed the trouser leg of Admiral Ernest King, the Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet. Staff assembled outside the thick wooden doors had heard 2 gunshots from inside the conference room. Air Marshal Sir William Welch reportedly shouted, "My God, the Americans are shooting the British!" Guards rushed in to discover a room full of ice chips and laughing generals and admirals. The conference agreed to construct a prototype, continue feasibility studies, and establish a joint British-American-Canadian board to oversee the project. Habakkuk had just survived a bullet. The question was whether it could survive something far more dangerous: the reality of engineering. The design that emerged from the feasibility studies was breathtaking in scale. Habakkuk 2 would be 2,000 feet long, 600 meters, with a beam of 300 feet and a hull depth of 200 feet. Its displacement would reach 2.2 million tons. To To put that in perspective, a modern Nimitz-class aircraft carrier displaces roughly 100,000 tons. Habakkuk would have been 22 times heavier than the largest warship ever built. It would carry up to 150 twin-engine bombers on its deck. Its hull would be 40 feet of solid Pykrete, thick enough to absorb any torpedo ever made. And if a torpedo did manage to punch a hole through that wall, the damage could theoretically be repaired by pumping in seawater and letting the refrigeration system freeze it solid again, a self-healing warship made of ice. In mid-February of 1943, construction began on a prototype at Patricia Lake in Jasper National Park, Alberta, Canada. The location was chosen because it was already closed to the public, near railway facilities, and offered a labour pool from a nearby camp for conscientious objectors. The prototype measured 60 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 20 feet high, weighing approximately 1,000 tons. It was built by 15 pacifists, Mennonites and Doukhobors, who were never told what they were constructing. They called it Noah's Ark. It was hidden beneath a roof disguised as a boathouse and kept frozen by a single 1-horsepower motor circulating cold air. But here was a fact that most accounts of this story overlook entirely. The Patricia Lake prototype was built from plain lake ice, not from Pykrete. The miracle material was being developed simultaneously in London, but was never used at the Canadian site. The model proved that a large ice structure could float and maintain its temperature, but it never tested the one thing that mattered most. And then came the sentence that ended everything. Sir Charles Goodeve, the Admiralty's Assistant Controller of Research and Development, identified the fatal contradiction at the heart of the project. Each full-scale ship would require 40,000 tons of cork insulation, thousands of miles of steel tubing for the refrigeration system, and the output of 4 entire power stations to keep it frozen. Max Perutz himself later admitted the devastating truth. The enormous amount of steel needed for the refrigeration plant was greater than that needed to build the entire carrier out of steel. One sentence: the whole reason for building a ship from ice was to save steel. And the ship made of ice needed more steel than a ship made of steel. The project's fundamental logic collapsed in on itself, like a house of cards. Costs had already spiraled from an initial estimate of £700,000 to £2.5 million, with no ceiling in sight. The rudder alone would need to be over 100 feet high, and nobody could solve the engineering challenge of steering a 2 million ton block of frozen water through Atlantic swells. Contradiction of keeping a crew of 3,600 warm inside a structure that had to remain permanently below -16 degrees was never resolved. But what truly ended Habakkuk was not engineering, it was victory. May of 1943 became known as Black May for the German submarine force. In that single month, 43 U-boats were destroyed, a quarter of their operational strength. Allied losses plummeted. On the 24th of May, Admiral Donitz, stunned by the scale of the catastrophe, ordered the withdrawal of all U-boats from the North Atlantic. Very long-range Liberator aircraft had finally closed the Black Pit. Escort carriers entered service in numbers. New radar detected surface submarines without warning. The strategic reason for Habakkuk simply evaporated. In December of 1943, the Joint Board met for the last time and delivered its verdict. The large Habakkuk II, made of Pykrete, has been found to be impractical because of the enormous production resources required and technical difficulties involved. The most ambitious warship ever conceived was officially abandoned, and Geoffrey Pyke, the man who had dreamed it into existence, was about to discover what happens when the dream is taken away. Even before Habakkuk was cancelled, Pyke was being erased from his own creation. MI5 had suspected him of being a Soviet agent throughout the war, believing he was a senior Comintern official codenamed Professor P. Watchers, followed him through bombed-out London. His letters were opened. Listening devices were planted in his rooms. Years later, in 1951, papers relating to Pyke were found in the flat of Guy Burgess, one of the infamous Cambridge Five, after his defection to Moscow. But a biography published decades later, drawing on declassified MI5 files, concluded that Pyke was neither a communist nor a spy. He was an anti-fascist who had given information to a Soviet contact on at least 2 occasions. But the actual spy inside combined operations was Pyke's own private secretary. The wrong man had been watched all along. None of that mattered to the military establishment. To appease the Americans who found Pyke insufferable, he was excluded from his own project and put on half pay. He objected furiously, refused to vacate his desk, and was eventually turned away by armed guards. When Mountbatten departed for Southeast Asia Command in October of 1943, Pyke lost his only protector. The door closed behind him and never reopened. After the war, Pyke attempted to claim the patent rights on Pykrete, a right that had been granted to him when he left combined operations. The Admiralty released the patent, and then in an act of calculated spite, they immediately declassified the entire project and publicized it in the newspapers. The patent was rendered worthless overnight. The tone of the press coverage was mockery. Look at the insane idea these eccentrics wasted your taxes on. The man who had conceived an unsinkable aircraft carrier, whose weasel had helped win battles from Normandy to the Pacific, whose experimental school had reshaped childhood education. That man was now a public joke. The establishment had not merely defeated Geoffrey Pyke, they had made sure the world would laugh at him. On the evening of Saturday, the 21st of February, 1948, at his rooms on Steeles Road in Hampstead, Geoffrey Pyke shaved off the famous beard that had defined him for decades. He placed a note on his door, "Please do not wake me." That night, quietly and deliberately, his life came to an end. His landlady found him on Monday morning, stretched out in a chair by the window, arms loose at his sides, his face bare. 3 sealed letters and a final message lay beside him. He was 54 years old. Time magazine observed that his passing was the only unoriginal thing he had ever done. The Times obituary began, "The loss of Geoffrey Pyke removes one of the most original, if unrecognized, figures of the present century." And then the world moved on as if he had never existed. But the things he left behind did not disappear. Max Perutz, the refugee who had tested Pykrete behind screens of frozen carcasses beneath Smithfield Meat Market, went on to win the 1962 Nobel Prize in chemistry for determining the molecular structure of hemoglobin. His Cambridge laboratory eventually produced 14 Nobel laureates. The Patricia Lake prototype survived 3 full Canadian summers after its refrigeration was switched off before finally sinking. Its remains still lie on the lake bed at depths of 26 to 43 meters. Wooden walls, tangles of ductwork, and refrigeration piping. A bronze plaque was installed underwater in 1988, reading, "Please respect our underwater heritage." About 20 divers visit each year. In 2009, the television show Mythbusters built a full-size boat from Pykrete, reached 23 miles per hour, and declared the material plausible but ludicrous. The following year, the BBC built their own Pykrete vessel in Portsmouth Harbour, and all 4 presenters had to be rescued when it capsized. Geoffrey Pyke remains what the Times called him in 1948, one of the most original and unrecognized figures of his century. The biblical verse he chose for his greatest project serves as both prophecy and epitaph. "I will work a work in your days, which ye will not believe, though it be told you."